Special FBI agent Rachel Johnson, an intelligent and skilled black woman, was driving back to the office after completing a lengthy investigation into a dangerous drug cartel. Rachel had spent months tracking this gang's underground operations and was on the verge of a critical breakthrough. She felt a slight sense of relief mixed with pride, although she knew this journey still held many challenges. Rachel wasn't just any FBI agent. As one of the few black women in the agency, she had to overcome numerous obstacles to prove herself, both in skill and resilience, within an institution where most of her colleagues were white men. In her early years, she endured skeptical glances and thinly veiled remarks, but Rachel never backed down. Her perseverance earned her the respect of her team and assignments on high-profile cases like this investigation. Sitting in the car, Rachel was deeply absorbed in thinking about the next steps in the case and recalling recent clues, trying to piece them together into a bigger picture, when suddenly the flashing red and blue lights of a police car appeared in her rearview mirror, interrupting her train of thought. Surprised, Rachel glanced at her speedometer and realized she hadn't been speeding. What did I do wrong, she wondered, as she began pulling over to comply with the officer's signal. The police car stopped behind her, and a tall, stern-looking male officer stepped out. His cold expression and hard gaze immediately gave Rachel an unsettling feeling. His name tag read, Officer Thompson. He slowly approached, his hand resting on the gun holstered at his hip, and stopped just beside Rachel's window. Rachel rolled down her window, staying calm and preparing to introduce herself. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" she asked politely, her hand ready with her FBI badge. But Officer Thompson didn't acknowledge her greeting. Instead, he glared at Rachel, speaking brusquely, "License and registration." Rachel was taken aback by his attitude but maintained her professionalism. "I'm an FBI agent returning from a mission," she responded, holding up her badge to clarify. However, Thompson merely glanced at her badge with a cold look, then sneered. "I said license and registration. Didn't you hear me?" Rachel began to sense that something was off. The disdain in Thompson's eyes made her feel uneasy. She had encountered difficult officers before, but there was something different this time. Keeping her composure, she decided to comply to avoid escalating the situation. "I'm on an official FBI investigation. This is an important mission, and I assure you, there's no violation here," she stated, trying to keep her tone calm and emphasizing that she was actively engaged in her work. However, Officer Thompson only grew more hostile. He lowered his voice, almost as if issuing a threat. "I don't care who you are. Step out of the car right now, or I'll pull you out myself." His words were cold and forceful, heavy with intimidation. Time seemed to slow down for Rachel as she realized the gravity of the situation. Passers-by had begun to stop, watching her and Thompson, with some even taking out their phones to record. Rachel suppressed the rising anger within her, trying once more to keep calm as she spoke. "Officer, I am an FBI agent, and I'm conducting official business. You have no legal grounds to handcuff or treat me this way." Instead of a professional response, Officer Thompson merely smirked, his eyes filled with contempt. He moved closer, glancing at Rachel's badge with no hint of respect. "You think that badge gives you a free pass to do whatever you want? I told you to show your license and you didn't comply. FBI or not, I don't care," he replied coldly. His gaze bore into Rachel with a look of disdain, as though he'd already decided she wasn't worthy of respect, just because she was a black woman. Rachel's heartbeat quickened. She'd dealt with difficult officers before, but none as aggressive as this. Working in the competitive and challenging environment of the FBI, she'd trained herself to be patient and composed. But this time, a sense of helplessness began to overwhelm her. Nonetheless, to prevent the situation from escalating, she chose to comply and retrieved her license and registration for him to inspect. However, Thompson had no intention of checking her documents properly. Instead, he grabbed her arm roughly, twisted it, and suddenly, violently handcuffed her. "What are you doing?" Rachel demanded, feeling a sharp pain as the handcuffs dug into her wrists. "I haven't committed any violation. This is a blatant abuse of power." "Abuse of power?" Thompson sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "You should know that in this town, I am the law. Do you think just because you've got that FBI badge, you're above everyone else? I don't care about that badge." His words were filled with contempt and a hint of threat. His eyes shone with satisfaction, as if humiliating Rachel in public gave him a private pleasure. Rachel felt discomfort and humiliation, but she knew arguing or resisting would only make things worse. As she was dragged toward the patrol car, bystanders began to gather, some looking at her with curiosity, while others raised their phones to record the scene. A feeling of helplessness washed over her as she realized she was becoming the center of unwanted attention. At that moment, another officer stepped out from the patrol car and walked toward them. Rachel silently hoped this new officer would intervene, or at least remind Thompson of his rude behavior. But the other officer merely glanced at Rachel before turning to Thompson, his expression evasive. He showed no intention of intervening and seemed hesitant to confront Thompson. This indifference left Rachel feeling even more isolated and disappointed. "You don't have the right to treat me like this," Rachel protested again as she was pushed roughly into the back seat of the patrol car. "I have the right to contact my superiors. That's a basic right." But Thompson only scoffed. "You'll get your rights when I say so. Now shut up and sit still," he said before slamming the door, leaving Rachel in the darkness of the patrol car. She felt the handcuffs digging into her wrists, restricting blood flow, but Thompson seemed intentionally indifferent to her discomfort. Through the car's windows, Rachel could see people still standing around, a few recording the scene on their phones, yet no one dared to intervene. She felt utterly alone and abandoned. As an FBI agent, she had risked her life countless times to uphold justice and ensure public safety, yet here she was, humiliated and treated like a criminal because an abusive cop wanted to flex his authority. Rachel tried to focus on her breathing, calming the storm of tension building in her chest. Each time she closed her eyes, memories of her hard-fought journey returned. Grueling training sessions, dangerous missions, and the times she had faced threats to protect others. All of it played vividly in her mind. She had dedicated her life to this job, sacrificing personal time, friends, and family, only to end up isolated and scrutinized by those she once considered allies. In the quiet moment as the patrol car moved forward, Rachel felt the bitterness of injustice deeply. She thought of her colleagues, those she had believed would always stand with her in the fight against crime and for justice. Yet now, when she needed support the most, no one was there to help. Instead, she only saw curious eyes, raised phones capturing her pain as a spectacle. To them, she seemed to be just another story, a topic for commentary. As she thought of Thompson, Rachel felt a surge of anger rising. How could someone with such authority behave so irresponsibly and unethically? Had power blinded his judgment? She had encountered many abusers of power in her career, but she never imagined she'd fall victim to it herself, within the very system she trusted. That's why she felt a duty to stand up, not only for herself but for others who might become future victims. Though the situation seemed hopeless, Rachel held on to the belief that she would make it through this ordeal. She reminded herself not to let fear take over. No matter what happened, she would fight to the end. She had learned to get up every time. She was knocked down, and this time would be no different. "I can't let him destroy everything I've built," she told herself. As the patrol car rolled down the dark road, memories of her mother's words surfaced. Her mother had always taught her that strength wasn't just about winning battles, but also about the ability to rise after every setback. "No one has the right to define your worth but you," her mother once said. That phrase had left a deep impression on Rachel and had always been a source of motivation during her most challenging moments. Now, handcuffed and treated like a criminal, she still clung to her belief in her value. Outside, the streetlights passed by, casting a determined look on Rachel's face. Despite facing humiliation and injustice, her eyes burned with resilience. Rachel knew that if she gave up, if she didn't fight back, people like Thompson would continue to operate unchecked, using their power to oppress the vulnerable. She couldn't allow that to happen. Finally, a thought sparked in Rachel's mind. She wouldn't let this situation define her. The moment she was freed, she would use every connection and resource at her disposal to expose Thompson's misconduct. She would not allow him to continue abusing his power to threaten others. Thompson's actions weren't just a personal insult to Rachel, but an insult to the very justice she had sacrificed so much to protect. When the patrol car stopped in front of the police station, Rachel already had a plan in mind. Despite the challenges and dangers she was about to face, she was prepared to fight. Rachel would transform her painful experience and every setback into strength, turning her anguish into motivation to stand up for what she believed in. She would not stay silent, nor would she back down, even if she faced isolation and threats from those holding power. Determination and iron will ignite a fierce flame within her, guiding her through whatever obstacles lay ahead. Deep down, Rachel understood this fight would be long and filled with hardship, with trials that would stack up and likely bring her face to face with the harshest losses. But she was ready. This wasn't just a duty, it was her mission as someone who believed unshakably in justice. Above all, she was Rachel, a dedicated FBI agent, a woman who would not yield to those attempting to impose injustice. She knew she was fighting not only for herself, but also for those who had, were, and would endure oppression, those without a voice in society. She would be their voice, shedding light on justice amid the suffocating shadows of abuse of power. No one, not even someone as powerful and ruthless as Thompson, could make her abandon her ideals. She knew that each step forward carried risks, but those vary. Risks had shaped her life and mission. Rachel would continue her journey, driven by unbreakable courage and resilience. Rachel sat quietly in the cramped holding cell, the cold, stifling air seeming to challenge her willpower. Her eyes settled on the damp wall in front of her, but her mind churned with a storm of indignation, fury, and resolve. From a young age, she had nurtured ideals of justice, of using her strength and knowledge to help the vulnerable. But now, she found herself a victim of a corrupt system, one that had turned power into a tool of oppression rather than protection. The flickering light in the cell cast a weak glow, barely illuminating part of the bleak space. Everything about this room seemed worn and forgotten, as if it were a place untouched by law. Rachel realized that Thompson had deliberately chosen to bring her here. This was a remote police station where he could easily manipulate the situation and eliminate any traces if things went wrong. She had been brought to a place where, even if she screamed, no one would hear her. Thompson had surely chosen a location where no one would dare intervene or question his authority. Rachel felt a profound sense of isolation and despair engulf her. She thought back to the challenging years she had endured, fighting constantly to earn respect and establish her position within a predominantly white, male-dominated agency. She had faced skeptical stares and silent mockery, yet persevered through it all to prove she was worthy of her FBI badge. But now, after achieving so much, she was being humiliated and detained simply because one abusive officer wanted to showcase his power. She recalled Thompson's cold eyes and mocking tone when he ordered her out of the car. He hadn't seen her as a federal agent, someone who had dedicated herself to protecting others, but simply as a black woman he could oppress using his authority. Rachel felt a tightening in her chest as she thought about how Thompson had used his position to trample on the very principles she had spent her life upholding. But the more she reflected, the more determined she became not to sink into helplessness. She had fought more dangerous foes before, and she would not back down from someone like Thompson. Her gaze settled on the cup of water on the table, the light glinting off it as a reminder that she still had one option: to not give up. She resolved to find a way to contact her superiors, no matter how difficult it would be, not only to free herself, but to expose the entire truth, so that officers like Thompson could no longer wield unchecked power without facing consequences. A surge of anger and steadfast resolve flooded through her. Rachel knew she had to stay calm. Any impulsive actions could complicate her situation and worsen the outcome, but she was equally determined not to let herself be oppressed without resistance. She had gone through rigorous training, learning patience and strategic thinking in the most challenging situations. Now, those lessons would serve as her weapons against this abuse of power. She looked into the empty void of the cell, closed her eyes, and pondered her next steps. Night had fallen outside, the gloomy sky mirroring her mood. But within that darkness, Rachel knew she had to be her source of light. She had once vowed to fight for those without a voice, and now she would fight for herself. Her resolve only grew stronger as she thought about other victims, people who might have endured similar situations, but lacked the opportunity or strength to push back. She would be the first to stand up, to expose this corruption. In the stillness of the cell, only Rachel's steady breathing filled the air, but within her, the flame of justice burned fiercer than ever. She would not allow this abuse of power to go unchecked. Sitting up straight, her eyes shone in the darkness as she silently vowed to do everything in her power to reclaim justice. Not just for herself, but for all who had and would face this injustice. Just then, the door to her cell swung open, and a young officer stepped in, carrying a simple meal. His name was Ryan, a familiar name Rachel had heard mentioned during her few encounters with local colleagues. Ryan glanced at her briefly before quickly looking away, as though avoiding her gaze. Rachel noticed the hesitation and unease in his movements, as if something heavy weighed on his mind. Not missing a beat, she spoke, her voice calm yet filled with resolve. "Ryan, please. I need your help." Ryan stopped, clearly unsure of how to respond. He hesitated, his gaze shifting uneasily before he spoke softly, his voice tense. I'm not supposed to get involved in this. Thompson, he holds a lot of power around here." But in his voice, Rachel sensed a flicker of empathy, a hint of inner conflict, as though he was wrestling with his conscience. Rachel nodded, keeping her tone steady and encouraging. "I understand your fear, Ryan, but this is wrong. You've seen Thompson abuse his power before, haven't you? And if it keeps going, more people will suffer this kind of injustice." Ryan frowned as if holding back something. He glanced at her for a moment, then looked away. "I know," he whispered, "but he has ways of controlling everything here. He can threaten and make others afraid. All of us, we're all scared of what he might do if we stand against him." Rachel took a deep breath, feeling a slow but steady anger rising. "Ryan, I'm an FBI agent. I'm here to do my job, not to be treated like this. If you help me contact my superiors, I'll do everything in my power to protect you. You can help me, not just for my sake, but to uphold the values you believed in when you became a police officer." Ryan remained silent, his eyes betraying a war within himself. He knew that by staying silent, he was also complicit in the corruption. Rachel could see the conflict in his eyes, and she decided to appeal to his compassion. "Ryan," she said, her tone becoming more urgent, "you chose this career for a reason. Maybe it was because you wanted to help others, to protect justice. But look around. If we let fear control us, how long will those values last? If I'm the one being wronged by Thompson today, it could be someone else tomorrow. Do you want to keep watching injustice happen and do nothing?" Ryan stood still, his eyes reflecting a hidden sorrow. Finally, he sighed, as though letting go of something that had been holding him back. "I don't agree with what Thompson is doing," he said slowly, his shoulders sagging. "But helping you could cost me everything. He could easily retaliate, not just against me, but my family too." Rachel sensed Ryan's fear, but she also understood that it was exactly what Thompson wanted, to instill fear so that no one would dare oppose him. She stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "I understand, but sometimes we have to do the right thing, even if it means putting ourselves at risk. You're not alone, Ryan. If you help me, I'll protect you, and we'll bring everything to light." Ryan remained silent, his gaze shifting between anxiety and a budding resolve. Finally, he took a deep breath, his eyes meeting Rachel's. "I'll try to help you, but only when no one's watching," he said, his voice laced with urgency and caution. "I'll come back after my shift. You'll need to wait quietly until then." Rachel offered a small, grateful smile, nodding. "Thank you, Ryan. I won't forget your courage." As Ryan stepped out, leaving behind the quiet of the cell, he left Rachel with a sense of hope, fragile but fierce. In her eyes, Ryan had done something rare. He had risen above fear and duty to lend her a hand, an act that Rachel knew carried significant risk. She felt not only gratitude but also a stronger resolve. She promised herself that she would not let Ryan's bravery go in vain. When the door closed, the cell returned to its stifling silence. Rachel sat in the darkness, her mind racing as she considered her next steps. She had endured days of confinement, the threats from Thompson and his accomplices. But now she wasn't as alone as before. She had an ally, and even if Ryan's help was just a small glimmer of light in the darkness, it renewed her strength. She recalled their brief exchange, the whispered promises, and Ryan's determination to assist her. In her mind, this moment was more than a memory. It was a powerful reminder that her fight was not just for herself, but for all those who had suffered under the injustice Thompson had inflicted. She knew if the plan failed, both she and Ryan would face grave consequences. Thompson wouldn't hesitate to crush any threat to his power. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on Rachel, but this time, it didn't weaken her. Instead, it fortified her resolve. She felt that she was no longer a helpless woman unjustly detained. Now, she was a fighter for justice. Sitting still in the dark, Rachel closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing to calm herself. She knew she needed patience, waiting for the right moment to act. Ryan had opened a pathway, and she wasn't going to waste that precious chance. The flame of justice burned within her, each small spark growing into an unstoppable force. She felt her resilience, an unyielding drive to stand up against those who sought to crush her. Rachel thought of the people outside, the innocent individuals who had been misled, those who had trusted Thompson without knowing he had manipulated them for his gain. She was fighting not just for herself, but for them, for those who deserved truth and justice. This thought filled her with strength and determination, like a torch that couldn't be extinguished. As she waited, Rachel began to plan every step carefully. She wondered how to safely reach her superiors and how to communicate without being detected. She knew she had to be clever, quick, and subtle before Thompson suspected anything. Every minute counted now, and every step required careful thought. Each night, as darkness enveloped the cell, Rachel reminded herself not to give up. Her willpower, forged through hardship and sacrifice, had prepared her for this fight. She would not let villains like Thompson dictate her life, nor would she let them continue to harm innocent people. She opened her eyes, looking into the darkness with unwavering determination. Her heart beat steadily, each pulse resonating with her fierce resolve. Now, Rachel wasn't just waiting in despair. She was readying herself for a showdown, a battle to reclaim justice. She knew she would fight until the truth came to light, and nothing, no one, could stop her on that path. After much internal struggle, Ryan finally decided he could no longer stand by and do nothing. Although he knew helping Rachel escape the station could put him in danger, he felt it was the right thing to do. Night had fallen, cloaking the remote. Police station in darkness, a perfect opportunity for their escape. Ryan looked around, ensuring no one was in the empty hallway before he entered Rachel's cell. Rachel was already prepared, as if she had known Ryan would return. Her eyes sparkled with hope and resolve when she saw him step inside. He signaled for silence and quickly unlocked her handcuffs with quiet efficiency. "We have to go now." "No time to waste," Ryan whispered, his gaze tense yet determined. Rachel nodded, keeping her breath steady despite her racing heartbeat. They moved quietly through the dark corridors of the police station, Ryan guiding them along paths he had carefully planned, avoiding high-traffic areas. But just as they were nearing the back exit, the alarm suddenly blared, shattering the silence and rousing everyone in the station. Rachel looked at Ryan, both their eyes filled with fear, yet neither wavered. "Run!" Ryan urged, his voice urgent, pulling Rachel toward the back door and pushing it open. They sprinted across the darkened parking lot, only the faint glow of distant streetlights guiding their way. But they hadn't gotten far when a familiar, threatening voice rang out behind them. "Ryan, what do you think you're doing?" Thompson's voice cut through the air, seething with anger. Rachel and Ryan didn't stop, pushing forward to put as much distance between them and the station as possible. Thompson quickly spotted them and began his pursuit, calling for backup from other officers loyal to him. As they fled down narrow alleyways leading away from the station, Rachel realized the situation was escalating as more police car headlights appeared in the distance. Thompson wasn't just following them. He had rallied his colleagues, turning their escape into a full-scale chase. Rachel knew Thompson wouldn't stop until he had them both in custody. The fury in Thompson's eyes and his ruthlessness made the situation even more perilous. "We can't keep our phones on," Rachel said quickly as they paused to catch their breath in a dark alley. "He can track the signal." Ryan nodded, understanding that any slip-up now could lead them right into Thompson's hands. They both powered off their phones, severing all contact that could be traced. Rachel and Ryan continued to flee, slipping into smaller alleys and pathways known to few. Every step was a race against time and survival, knowing Thompson's men could appear at any moment. The streetlights flickered over their heads, casting shadows on Ryan and Rachel's sweat-streaked faces. They eventually found a desolate area on the city's outskirts, a cluster of abandoned warehouses, an ideal spot to hide, if only temporarily. They slipped into one of the warehouses, panting as they glanced around. The interior was pitch dark, but enough for them to find a hidden spot. Ryan sat down, his hands trembling, though his eyes showed unwavering determination. "I didn't expect things to go this far," he muttered, almost to himself. Rachel placed a reassuring hand on Ryan's shoulder, her gaze steady. "We did the right thing, Ryan. Thompson won't back down, but we have to keep going. If he catches us, we'll lose everything." The wail of police sirens and flashing lights outside the warehouse signaled that their time was running out. Thompson and his crew had closed in, now only a short distance away. Rachel whispered urgently to Ryan, "We need to leave now." Ryan nodded, gripping Rachel's hand as they slipped out through a side alley beside the warehouse. The sounds of footsteps and officers' voices grew louder, forcing them to change direction constantly, finding every possible hiding spot to keep from being seen. Rachel felt the exhaustion in her legs, but her determination and survival instinct kept her moving. They finally reached a secluded area near the edge of a forest on the city's outskirts, pausing to catch their breath while keeping a vigilant eye out for any sign of their pursuers. Despite his fatigue, Ryan's eyes still burned with resolve as he asked, "What do we do now? We can't just keep running." Rachel looked at him, trying to formulate a plan. "We need a way out of here and a way to contact my superiors as soon as possible. If we can reach a secure signal area, I can call for help." Ryan nodded, and the two of them made their way into the forest, hoping that the dense trees would provide them with cover and help them evade Thompson and his men. In the thick, dark shadows of the forest, they moved cautiously, every rustling branch heightening their senses. Only the sound of their breaths and their pounding hearts echoed in the quiet night, accompanied by the fierce determination burning in Rachel's chest to survive and seek justice. They continued moving through the darkness, hoping this would be the place Thompson wouldn't be able to find them, at least until they could find a way to turn the tables and reveal the truth about the injustice surrounding them. Once they found a safe clearing in the forest, Rachel and Ryan paused to catch their breath, using the precious moment to plan their next steps. Rachel took out her phone and quickly contacted her FBI colleague. The call connected, and a familiar voice answered on the other end. "Rachel, it's Alex. Where are you?" Rachel took a deep breath, trying to stay calm as she explained the situation. She recounted Thompson's abuse of power and how he had organized a manhunt for her, mobilizing loyal officers to prevent anyone from assisting her. Alex listened intently, then said, "Rachel, we'll send reinforcements, but until then, find somewhere safe to hide. Thompson won't stop, especially if he knows you can expose his secrets." Rachel thanked Alex, then turned to Ryan. "We have to stay strong. The FBI will send backup, but until then, we need to protect ourselves." Ryan nodded, his face growing more resolute. Despite the tension, he stood firmly by Rachel's side, prepared to face any danger with her. Meanwhile, back at the station, Thompson, aware that Rachel could be a significant threat to his power, was sparing no effort to ensure her capture. He coerced his colleagues to follow his orders, offering rewards and issuing threats to ensure no one dared to help. Rachel. He couldn't let her escape, knowing that, as long as she remained free, his secrets were at risk. Thompson deployed an array of plans to corner Rachel and Ryan, setting up ambush points along the trails he guessed they might take. He even equipped officers with flashlights and tracking devices, combing through every inch of the forest. Thompson had vowed to leave no escape for her. Rachel and Ryan, on high alert, continued moving deeper into the woods, taking advantage of the rugged terrain to maintain a safe distance. They chose the most challenging paths, maneuvering through dense foliage and over slippery rocks. Each time they crossed a hill or waded through a small stream, Rachel felt the fear and pressure mounting from behind. But she refused to stop, knowing there was too much at stake. As they climbed a steep, rocky slope, a flashlight beam appeared in the distance, accompanied by hurried footsteps drawing closer. Rachel and Ryan quickly ducked into a hidden corner, waiting silently. They could hear Thompson's voice commanding his team to search thoroughly. Don't leave a single tree unchecked. She can't hide in this forest forever. Rachel's heart pounded, but she held her breath, staying completely still. She knew even the slightest noise could put them in immediate danger. Ryan was equally silent, his intense focus entirely on protecting Rachel. When the flashlights finally moved away, they resumed their escape, now moving faster and with more urgency. Rachel knew time was against them, and Thompson wouldn't give up until he had erased all traces of her escape. She and Ryan kept moving, knowing that every hiding place was only temporary. Throughout their journey, Rachel and Ryan faced countless obstacles from the treacherous terrain. They waded through icy streams to erase their tracks, climbed high rocky ledges, and hid beneath thick canopies of trees. Each time a flashlight glimmered from Thompson's men in the distance, they froze, holding their breath until the danger passed. The tension escalated as they realized that Thompson not only had the advantage of manpower, but also a better understanding of the area. His officers swept each region with thoroughness and aggression, forcing Rachel and Ryan to keep changing directions. The constant pressure of the chase was like a thick fog around them, yet it only fueled Rachel's resolve and strengthened her determination. As dawn approached and sunlight filtered through the trees, Rachel realized they had managed to evade capture for another night. But with Thompson still hot on their trail, every minute was a race against time and survival. Rachel and Ryan stopped briefly to catch their breath, but neither dared to lose sight of any signs that their pursuers might still be closing in. "We're not going to stop," Rachel told Ryan, her voice steady. "Thompson will pay for what he's done, but to make that happen, we need to survive and wait for backup." Ryan nodded, his gaze filled with unwavering trust. Both of them knew the journey ahead was still long and perilous, but their resolve had been tested and forged stronger by the intense hours behind them. And no matter how hard Thompson tried to stop them, Rachel knew that the truth would eventually come to light and justice would prevail. The relentless chase led Rachel and Ryan to an abandoned cabin hidden beneath the dense canopy of trees. They knew this would be their final stand, a place where they would confront Thompson, the man blinded by power and seething hatred. Inside the cabin, faint moonlight filtered through the cracked, rotting roof, casting an eerie, tense atmosphere over the room. Rachel and Ryan moved quietly, inspecting every corner, searching for anything they could use in this imminent showdown. Rachel grabbed an old wooden plank, worn but sturdy enough to serve as a makeshift weapon. Ryan, though still shaken from their long escape, readied himself with a metal rod he'd found on the dusty floor. Time seemed to stand still, broken only by their heavy breaths and the fading sounds of Thompson's men retreating, leaving him alone to confront them. He wanted to capture Rachel and Ryan himself, to make them living proof of his dominance. Rachel and Ryan knew they had only a few minutes to prepare before Thompson's arrival, and that they had no one to rely on but each other. Then came the heavy footsteps outside, growing louder as Thompson approached. His cold, sharp eyes glinted under the moonlight as he stepped over the cabin's threshold, like a predator closing in on its prey. His face twisted with hatred and madness as he stared at Rachel, pure hostility in his gaze. "Rachel," he sneered, his smile revealing arrogance and malice. "You think you're getting out of here? You think that FBI badge will protect you from me?" Rachel stood tall, her eyes steely, meeting his gaze without a flicker of fear. "Thompson, you can chase me, abuse your power, but the truth will come out. I'm not afraid of men like you." Thompson let out a cold, echoing laugh, his voice filling the cabin and making the air feel heavier. "The truth?" he scoffed. "Truth means nothing when I'm the one in control. I am the law here. I decide who lives and who dies in this town." His words dripped with self-satisfaction and disdain, and then the inevitable clash erupted as Thompson charged at Rachel with ferocious speed and strength. Rachel dodged quickly, but he was too powerful, slamming her against the wall, trying to force her into submission. Ryan, though fearful, couldn't abandon her. He lunged, swinging the metal rod at Thompson from behind. Thompson turned abruptly, shoving Ryan to the floor with brutal force. Rachel seized the moment to regain her footing, attacking Thompson with every ounce of strength and determination she had. Though she lacked a proper weapon, she swung the wooden plank at his legs, hoping to destabilize him. Thompson let out a roar of pain but managed to keep his balance, his eyes blazing with fury. "Rachel, I'll teach you a lesson," he spat through clenched teeth, each word dripping with murderous intent. "You think you can touch me and walk away unscathed?" He lunged again, trying to grab her, but this time Rachel was ready. She sidestepped and swung the plank down on his shoulder, causing him to stumble. Ryan, despite his pain, got back up and joined the fight, using the cabin's confined space to their advantage. Thompson, with his large build, couldn't maneuver as easily as Rachel and Ryan, forcing him into a disadvantage. His confidence began to wane, replaced by aggression bordering on recklessness as he struggled to keep up with their rapid movements. In the heat of the struggle, Rachel noticed how Thompson's arrogance and hatred had blinded him, making him reckless and sloppy. He was no longer in control, thrashing at them like a wild beast with no strategy. With renewed determination, Rachel swung her plank again, this time striking his knee, forcing him to collapse in pain. Thompson fell to the ground, clutching his injured leg, his face contorted in agony. But he refused to surrender. In a voice filled with venom, he snarled, "You think you've won? You'll never escape my shadow, Rachel. I'll hunt you down wherever you try to hide." His words echoed through the cabin like a final curse. Rachel looked down at him, her gaze unwavering. "Thompson, you're not the law, and the truth will be revealed. Your power is just an illusion. The FBI knows what you've done, and they're on their way." At that moment, the sound of police sirens filled the air, and beams of headlights pierced through the small cracks in the cabin walls, signaling the arrival of Rachel's reinforcements. Thompson turned his head sharply, a flicker of panic in his eyes as he realized his time was up. Rachel and Ryan stepped back, keeping a safe distance as the FBI agents entered, fully armed and prepared. A chaotic swirl took over Thompson's mind. His heart pounded like a wild animal cornered with no escape. The tension was palpable, each second ticking away, bringing him closer to the end he had always dreaded. He had prepared countless escape plans, numerous ways to evade law enforcement, but now, under the piercing lights that illuminated every shadowy corner of the cabin, he knew all his schemes were futile. A deep regret surged within him, not for his actions, but for the things he would never have the chance to accomplish. He had once dreamt of living a life free from fear, without looking over his shoulder with every step, without the constant dread of being caught. His ambitions and desires now felt like distant dreams, slipping through his fingers. Helpless and despairing, Thompson realized that resisting would only pull him deeper into a dead end. He couldn't stop thinking about the pivotal choices that had led him here, about the decisions that had pushed him down this path. In his youth, he had been intelligent, sharp, and full of potential, yet the dark road he chose had spiraled into a life of corruption. He wondered if there could have been another path, one where he could have lived an ordinary life, spared from this reckoning. As memories of his past flooded back, his turmoil only deepened. He remembered the loved ones who had drifted away, relationships he had sacrificed for personal ambition and ruthless actions. Part of him had once believed he was untouchable, that he could overcome any obstacle, deceive anyone, and escape the reach of the law. But now, with the red and blue lights of the police reflecting on the walls, he saw himself as nothing more than a pawn, cornered into an unwinnable position. Fear began to turn into anger. Anger at himself for ending up here. Anger at Rachel and Ryan for forcing him into this predicament. His eyes flashed with resentment, but the fire quickly faded as he realized he was utterly powerless against his fate. The regret returned, stronger, crashing over him like a wave, drowning him in the hopelessness of his situation. He knew the agents wouldn't give him a single opportunity to resist. Every exit was locked down, every escape plan exposed. Thompson looked up at the ceiling as if hoping someone or something might intervene, might save him from this moment. But it was all just wishful thinking. The steady sound of footsteps grew closer, intensifying his erratic heartbeat. The feeling of helplessness morphed into a painful awareness that, despite his former sense of strength, he was just a small, fallible human, standing in the storm of justice. He struggled to breathe, trying to remain calm, but his hands trembled uncontrollably. His fingers were ice cold as if the last bit of strength was abandoning him. A profound loneliness suddenly enveloped him. He once had followers, people who would follow his orders without question. But now he stood here alone, entirely isolated. There was no one by his side, no one coming to his rescue, only the bitter memories of a life riddled with wrong choices. As the agents closed in, a quiet acceptance began to settle in his mind. Perhaps in the end he would have to face the consequences. Part of him wanted to scream, to run from the cabin, but another part remained silent, almost resigned. Thompson closed his eyes, feeling a cold bead of sweat slide down his forehead as he awaited the inevitable moment that he knew he could no longer escape. Rachel stepped forward, her gaze steady and resolute. "Thompson, it's over. You can't hide forever," she said, her voice filled with conviction. Behind her stood a group of FBI agents, including longtime colleagues, who witnessed Thompson bowing his head under the weight of justice. As the agents searched the cabin, they uncovered additional evidence of Thompson's illegal activities, documents Rachel had painstakingly gathered during her investigation. The papers revealed not only Thompson's bribery and abuse of power, but also his collusion with local criminals, a connection long suspected but lacking proof. As Thompson was handcuffed and led away, he tried to justify himself. "You don't understand. I only did what was necessary to protect this town." But his words fell flat. Rachel's colleagues, along with local officers, had finally seen Thompson for who he truly was, and no one believed his excuses anymore. Meanwhile, the town quickly learned of Thompson's arrest, and a strong public outcry emerged. Stories of his abuse and misconduct began to surface as people who had endured his oppressive behavior or been victims of his actions came forward. Those who had lived in silence and fear no longer hesitated. They spoke up, sharing personal experiences to expose Thompson's wrongdoing. These testimonies were like scattered pieces of a puzzle, forming a complete picture of a man who had exploited his power for personal gain and to dominate others. Stories emerged of his arrogant decisions, flagrant disregard for procedure, and even threats against anyone who dared oppose him. Suppressed anger and frustration flooded out, creating an unstoppable wave of demand for justice. Even Thompson's former colleagues, who had once turned a blind eye to his actions, now faced the pressure of the FBI and the community, forcing them to acknowledge the truth they had long avoided. The arrest triggered a domino effect throughout the town's institutions, prompting leaders to reevaluate their practices to prevent future cases of abuse. People began questioning the accountability of those in power and wondered how many more Thompsons existed yet to be exposed. Some called for broader investigations to ensure transparency and fairness in the system. Thompson's case became more than just a personal downfall. It symbolized the struggle against abuse of power, rekindling the community's sense of justice and unity. Those who once lowered their heads in resignation now felt empowered to stand up for truth and justice. Rachel not only regained her freedom, but also upheld her honor and the FBI's reputation. Standing among her colleagues and townspeople, she felt a massive weight lift off her shoulders. Years of relentless effort and challenges had affirmed her unwavering belief in justice. Ryan, who had stood by her through the entire ordeal, approached with a soft smile. "Rachel, you did it. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who believes in justice." Rachel nodded, her eyes bright with pride and the satisfaction of victory. As Thompson was led away, Rachel felt a profound sense of peace. She had overcome one of the most difficult battles of her life, a fight not only against Thompson, but against the corrupt system backing him. She knew that this journey had strengthened her resolve and that she would continue her path in pursuit of truth and justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who believed in what was right. As dawn broke, Rachel and her colleagues returned with a renewed faith in justice. Deep down, she knew the fight was far from over, that people like Thompson would always exist. But she was confident that as long as she held firm to her beliefs, she would be ready to face any challenge to protect the values she had dedicated her life to defending. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, marking a new beginning for the town, Rachel stood in the police station courtyard, a place where, just hours ago, she had confronted those abusing their power. Although Thompson had been arrested, Rachel knew this victory was only the start of a long fight against the entrenched issues of abuse of power and racial bias within the police force. Rachel looked around, feeling the support of her FBI colleagues who had stood by her during this ordeal. They all understood that this was more than just a personal battle. It was a fight for justice for the entire community. "We can't stop here," Rachel told her colleagues, her voice carrying resolve. "We need to root out every wrongful act, every abuse of power, and seek justice not just for ourselves, but for everyone." Rachel committed herself to continuing this fight, not only for her own sake, but for everyone who had suffered under oppression. She knew that Thompson was only part of a larger web of corruption. Those who protected him were still hidden, manipulating the system from the shadows. Rachel was determined to dig deeper, gathering the evidence needed to expose the full extent of the wrongdoing. "We need to find those who covered up the truth, those who enabled these abuses of power," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. Her colleagues nodded in agreement, inspired by her courage and strength in the face of extreme adversity. Her actions sparked a new wave of responsibility within the FBI, a realization that they were at a pivotal moment where real change could happen. Rachel was ready to lead them toward a better future. Rachel proposed, "We need to implement training programs on accountability and professional ethics, not just for the police, but for everyone in the justice system. We need to rebuild the community's trust in the rule of law." Her colleagues listened intently, each one echoing Rachel's call for change. A sense of unity and determination filled the air. They realized that responsibility lay not just with those in power, but with every individual within the system. "We must create an environment where people feel safe speaking up," Rachel added. "One where abuse of power has no place. We need to encourage those in our profession to protect both their colleagues and innocent civilians. We must be the pioneers of reform." Rachel felt a surge of excitement, knowing her vision had resonated with her colleagues. Those beside her were no longer just co-workers. They were allies in a shared mission. They had witnessed the wrongdoings, but now, instead of fear, they were ready to act. As Rachel walked out of the police station, she felt a renewed sense of hope. She had faced a tremendous challenge and now promised herself she would not stop. She would fight not just for her protection, but for all those without a voice. The road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles. But with each step, Rachel saw her purpose more clearly. Rachel was ready to fight not only for herself, but for everyone who had been oppressed. She knew the path forward would be difficult, but she had the support of her colleagues and the people in the community who had stood against injustice. "This is only the beginning," Rachel thought. "I will continue this fight. I won't let those who abuse power escape justice. I won't stop until everyone in my community is treated fairly." She had a steadfast belief that truth would ultimately prevail, and she was prepared for any challenge that lay ahead. Rachel was determined to initiate training programs for new police recruits, focusing on accountability and professional ethics. In addition, she planned to organize community workshops where people could share their stories and learn how to stand up for justice. With a heart full of passion and unwavering resolve, Rachel knew she was embarking on a promising new journey. Standing in the fresh morning air, Rachel looked toward the horizon where the sun was rising. She felt the power of change, the strength she and her colleagues would bring together. She knew that this fight was not just for herself, but for all who had suffered from injustice. With a new light in her heart, Rachel vowed never to give up and committed to protecting the values she had fought for all her life. Finally, Thompson's trial took place. The proceedings spanned several days, becoming the center of attention for the entire town and surrounding areas. The courtroom was packed from early morning with not only his direct victims, but also witnesses and those who had heard of his abuses. They came not just to witness justice, but to see the moment a man who had instilled fear was held accountable under the law. In his prison uniform, Thompson looked stripped of his former authority. He sat with his head down, listening to the sharp accusations from the prosecution. Prosecutors, who had worked tirelessly, gathering evidence from witnesses, documents, and recordings, meticulously presented each piece, ensuring there were no gaps for Thompson to escape his crimes. Rachel and her FBI colleagues worked closely with the prosecution, assisting in preparing documents, organizing testimonies, and even ensuring witness safety throughout the trial. Rachel understood that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reveal the full extent of Thompson's wrongdoings. The witness testimonies were the most powerful and emotional part of the trial. Dozens of individuals took the stand, each carrying a story of how Thompson had oppressed, manipulated, and abused his power over them. Former colleagues, now brave enough to speak out, recounted times they were forced to cover up his wrongdoings, even falsifying reports to protect him. These testimonies left the courtroom silent, broken only by the occasional sobs of witnesses as they relived painful memories. Other victims from the town also found the courage to speak. A woman, her voice shaking but resolute, recounted how Thompson had threatened her family when she dared to report his misconduct. A man, eyes red with emotion, described how Thompson had bullied him to the point of fleeing his home. These honest testimonies served as both evidence and the voice of a community that had endured silent suffering for far too long. The prosecution spared no detail, presenting emails, threatening messages, and falsified documents that left no room for doubt about Thompson's cruelty and disregard for human rights. FBI witnesses took the stand to explain the investigative procedures, detailing how they uncovered Thompson's misconduct and the techniques he used to evade system checks. Thompson's defense attorney tried to minimize the charges, arguing that Thompson had acted within his authority and under significant work pressures. However, each attempt crumbled against the mountain of evidence and testimonies. The judge listened intently, asking pointed questions, and refused to let vague justifications derail the pursuit of justice. With each passing day, the courtroom atmosphere grew more intense. Under the courtroom lights, long-buried truths were finally exposed. A heavy yet determined atmosphere filled the room, as everyone present realized they were witnessing a turning point for the town. Finally, after irrefutable evidence and compelling accusations, the jury found Thompson guilty on multiple serious charges, including abuse of power, witness intimidation, and human rights violations. Silence filled the courtroom as the judge announced the sentence, a harsh verdict affirming that justice had been served and that truth would always prevail. Rachel sat quietly, feeling a wave of peace and pride wash over her. This was not just her victory, it was a victory for all who had endured oppression. Rachel reflected on everything she had endured in her long journey to bring justice to the oppressed citizens of the town. She recalled the fearful eyes of the witnesses when she first met them, the trepidation they felt in standing up against a powerful figure of authority. She remembered watching them, trembling yet resolute as they shared their stories, filled with fear and anger, but willing to take that step with her. A profound gratitude welled up within her, realizing that their courage had been the anchor keeping her steadfast until the very end. As the judge's gavel fell, declaring Thompson's sentence, Rachel felt an incomparable sense of relief. This was not only liberation for her, but for everyone who had suffered under his oppressive rule. Tears brimmed in her eyes as a soft but determined smile crossed her face. This was the justice that she and the townspeople had waited for so long, a reaffirmation that, despite the countless trials they'd faced, truth and justice could still prevail. Looking around the courtroom, Rachel saw the emotional faces of those who had endured in silence, now breathing the air of justice. Yet a profound sense of responsibility lingered within her, reminding her that her journey did not end there. She knew that beyond this trial, there was still much to be done to safeguard the integrity of the system. She felt a renewed obligation to protect the vulnerable and to uphold the values she had tirelessly fought for. Stepping out of the courthouse, Rachel was filled with an indescribable feeling, her heart pounding with a mixture of emotions. Her breaths were lighter, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted from her chest. This was the moment she had longed for, the reward for all the sleepless nights, the dangers, and the relentless pursuit of bringing truth to light. Reflecting on the obstacles she had overcome, Rachel felt her spirit swell with pride and resilience. With a determined gaze fixed forward, Rachel knew this was the start of a new chapter. It was no longer just a duty, it was a mission to deliver fairness and protect the values she held dear. She silently promised herself she would continue fighting, no matter what challenges lay ahead. She stepped forward, embracing the morning's brilliant sunlight, her heart brimming with hope and renewed resolve. And so, that was the end for Thompson, the arrogant and racist cop finally facing the punishment he deserved. Through the trial, justice was served not only for Agent Rachel, but for all who had been victims of abuse of power. What do you think about Agent Rachel's courageous stand for justice? Despite all the obstacles, share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories. Thank you for watching.